December 29th, 1989. The mood in New York City was bordering on hysteria. A foreign power had just purchased the iconic Rockefeller Center. In Washington, congressmen were smashing electronics on the Capitol lawn in a symbolic act of rage. The media narrative was unanimous. The American century is over. The new superpower has arrived. But the country wasn't China. It was Japan. At that specific moment in history, the ground beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was valued higher than the entire state of California combined. Japanese banks held more assets than American banks. Economists predicted that by 2010, Japan's GDP would eclipse the United States. It wasn't a prediction, it was treated as a mathematical certainty. But history has a dark sense of humor. Only 3 trading days after hitting its all-time high, the Japanese asset bubble popped. The inevitable superpower didn't rule the world. They entered 3 decades of economic stagnation, known today as the lost decades. They stopped growing, their prices stopped rising, and their young people stopped having children. It is now 2026. The names have changed, but the fear remains identical. Today, the headlines don't say Japan Inc., they say the rise of the Red Dragon. We look at the gleaming skylines of Shenzhen that make New York look outdated. We see a navy launching ships faster than the US can build them. To the casual observer, China's ascent still seems inevitable. But if you look past the propaganda, you don't see the rise of a new America. You see the replay of 1989 Japan. For the last 3 years, the data suggests that China has walked directly into the exact same trap that destroyed Tokyo's ambitions, but with one terrifying difference. When Japan fell, they were already rich. Their citizens had a high per capita income and a global safety net. China is attempting the impossible. They are hitting the economic wall while still being a middle-income nation. They are violating the most basic rule of economic development. China grew old before it grew rich. And unlike Japan, now that the bubble has finally burst, there is no safety net to catch the fall. To understand why the Chinese century might be over before 2030, we have to look at the concrete trap they built for themselves. For the last 20 years, the Chinese economic miracle has been fueled by one singular, overwhelming addiction: concrete. To understand the scale of this addiction, consider this. Between 2011 and 2013, China used more cement than the United States used in the entire 20th century. Think about that. In just 3 years, they poured more concrete than America did to build the Hoover Dam, the interstate highway system, and the Manhattan skyline combined. This construction boom wasn't driven by market demand, it was driven by a political mandate. In Beijing, the CCP set GDP growth targets to impress the world. To hit those numbers, local governments borrowed billions to build infrastructure that nobody needed. They built airports where no planes landed. They built 6-lane highways connecting rural villages. And most famously, they built entire cities where nobody lived, the ghost cities. For a long time, this worked. Real estate became the engine of the economy, accounting for nearly 30% of China's total GDP. China had inflated a bubble nearly twice the size of the one that caused the 2008 global financial crisis. But 5 years ago, in 2021, the math finally broke. The collapse of Evergrande, the world's most indebted developer, wasn't just a corporate bankruptcy, it was the signal that the Ponzi scheme was over. By 2024, the contagion had spread to Country Garden and nearly every major developer. The liquidity dried up. Construction cranes stopped moving across the country. Millions of Chinese citizens who had poured their life savings into pre-sale apartments were left paying mortgages on homes that were never finished. This is the concrete trap. The CCP is now in an impossible position. Over the last 2 years, they tried to stimulate the market, but it failed. If they let the real estate market find its true value, prices will collapse, wiping out the household wealth of the Chinese middle class, 70% of whose wealth is tied up in property.
But if they keep propping it up, they're just adding more debt to a system that is already drowning in it. Japan faced a similar real estate crisis in 1990. It took them 30 years to recover. But China's problem in 2026 is mathematically worse. Japan had a growing population when their bubble burst. China is trying to deflate the biggest asset bubble in history at the exact moment their population has officially started to shrink. They have built enough apartments to house 3 billion people, but today the population has dropped below 1.4 billion for the first time in modern history. There are simply no people left to buy the houses.
If the real estate crisis is the heart attack that stopped the Chinese economy, then the demographic crisis is the cancer that has been slowly killing it for 40 years. And unlike a market crash, you cannot fix demographics with a bailout package. You cannot print people. To understand why China's collapse is mathematically guaranteed, we have to look at the single most destructive social experiment in human history, the one-child policy. Implemented in 1980, the goal was simple: stop the population from growing too fast so the economy could catch up. On paper, it worked. They prevented 400 million births. But in doing so, they planted a time bomb that detonated 3 years ago in 2023, when the government officially admitted that the population had started to shrink. Now, in 2026, we are staring at the fallout. The result is a phenomenon sociologists call the 4-2-1 problem. Picture a pyramid turned upside down. At the top, you have 4 grandparents, in the middle, 2 parents, and at the bottom, 1 single child. That one child is now expected to support 2 aging parents and 4 elderly grandparents, all by themselves. There are no siblings to share the burden. There are no cousins to help out. This is the crushing reality for the Chinese generation born after 1990. They are not buying houses because they can't afford them. They are not starting businesses because they are drowning in elder care costs. And most critically, they are not having children of their own because they simply cannot afford to feed another mouth. The fertility rate in China has now crashed to roughly 1.0, far below the replacement rate of 2.1 needed just to keep a population stable. This isn't a decline, it's a collapse. For the global economy, this changes everything. For 30 years, China was the world's factory because they had an endless supply of cheap, young labor. That supply is gone. The average age in China is now older than in the United States. Walk through the industrial hubs of Guangdong today, and you will see something that was unimaginable 10 years ago. Factories are closing down not because of a lack of orders, but because of a lack of workers. Wages are skyrocketing because there are fewer young people to fill the jobs. This is why manufacturing is fleeing to Vietnam, India, and Mexico. China has lost its only competitive advantage. And this brings us back to the Japan comparison, but with a terrifying twist. When Japan's demographics collapsed in the 1990s, they had already become a high-income nation. They had built a massive sovereign wealth fund. They had a healthcare system that could support an aging population. Their citizens were rich before they got old. China has done the exact opposite. They are currently facing a retirement crisis of biblical proportions. By 2035, an estimated 400 million people in China will be over the age of 60. That is more than the entire population of the United States. Who will pay for their pensions? Who will pay for their health care? The state pension fund is projected to run out of money within the next decade. The young generation is too small to pay the taxes needed to support the old generation. The math is merciless. In 2026, China is stuck in what economists call the middle income trap, but it's actually much worse. It is a demographic death spiral. They have an economy that requires constant growth to survive, fueled by a population that is shrinking by millions every single year. So, if you're the CCP and you're running out of people, what do? The logical solution, the American solution, would be to open the doors. You invite the world in. You replace your missing workers with immigrants. But this is where the China model hits a cultural wall that no amount of money can break. This is why the dragon will never fly again.
When a superpower starts to die, there is historically only one medicine that can prolong its life: new blood. The United States has survived every demographic crisis in its history because it has a cheat code. When America runs out of engineers, it imports them from India. When it runs out of doctors, it recruits them from the Philippines. When it runs out of farm workers, it opens the southern border. It is messy, it is politically chaotic, but economically, it is the only reason the United States is still growing, while the rest of the developed world shrinks. Elon Musk, Satya Nadella, Jensen Huang, the architects of the American economy, were all born somewhere else. China looks at this model and realizes it needs to do the same. But here is where the Japan trap snaps shut. China cannot become an immigrant nation. It is structurally, culturally, and politically impossible. First, let's look at the numbers. They are staggering. In the United States, foreign-born residents make up nearly 15% of the population. In China, it is less than 0.1%. For decades, getting a Chinese green card was statistically harder than winning the lottery. Between 2004 and 2014, while the U.S. issued 10 million green cards, China issued only 7,000 total. Even as the demographic crisis became undeniable in 2024 and 2025, and Beijing tried to relax the rules to attract talent, nobody came. Why? Because high-skilled immigration is not just about money, it is about freedom. If you are a brilliant AI researcher from Bangalore or a biotech engineer from Berlin, where do you move? Do you move to Silicon Valley, where you can speak your mind, access the uncensored internet, and protect your intellectual property? Or do you move to Beijing, where your research is monitored by the state, your internet is firewalled, and your capital can be seized if you say the wrong thing about the party? The answer is obvious. The global war for talent is over, and China lost. But the problem goes deeper than just policy. It is about identity. China is not a melting pot. It is a civilization state built around the Han Chinese identity, which makes up over 90% of the population. The CCP's legitimacy is built on nationalism, on the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. You cannot sell a narrative of ethnic nationalism while simultaneously inviting millions of Africans, Southeast Asians, and Westerners to settle in your cities and marry your children. Japan faced this same dilemma in the 1990s. They chose to preserve their culture over their economy. They chose to shrink rather than open up. China is making the exact same choice, but on a scale that is terrifying to watch. In fact, the flow of people is moving in the wrong direction. We aren't seeing the world move to China, we're seeing China move to the world. This is the phenomenon known as runology or run shoe. Since the lockdowns ended, the wealthy and educated elite of Shanghai and Beijing have been voting with their feet. They're moving their families, and more importantly, their money, to Singapore, Tokyo, Vancouver, and Sydney. In 2026, China is suffering from the worst brain drain in its modern history. The very people Beijing needs to innovate their way out of this trap are the ones buying condos in Singapore. And finally, there is the sheer scale of the problem. Even if China ripped down the Great Firewall and opened its borders tomorrow, it wouldn't matter. The math simply doesn't work. China's working-age population is shrinking by millions of people every year. To offset that loss, China would need to import the entire population of a medium-sized country annually. There are not enough migrants in the world to fill the hole that the one-child policy dug. So the dragon is trapped. It has a shrinking workforce, a collapsing real estate market, and a closed society that repels the only thing that could save it. They're sealing the tomb from the inside. And this isolation leads us directly to the next failure point, the one thing China thought it could do better than anyone else: innovation.
Before we dissect the biggest lie of the Chinese economy, I have a small request.
The algorithm suppresses content that exposes these geopolitical realities. If you want to help this video break through the digital Great Firewall and reach more people, simply hit the like button. It takes you a split second, but it helps the channel immensely. Thank you. Now, let's look at the only escape route China had left. For the last 10 years, Xi Jinping has bet the entire future of the Communist Party on one strategy: high-quality development. The plan was simple. China would stop making cheap plastic toys and t-shirts and start making the world's most advanced microchips, AI, and electric vehicles. They would transition from the world's factory to the world's laboratory. This is how Japan escaped the trap. They started with cheap electronics, but then they gave the world Sony, Nintendo, and Toyota. They moved up the value chain. South Korea did the same with Samsung and Hyundai. China believed it was next, but they forgot one crucial variable. Dictatorships are bad at innovation. True innovation requires disruption. It requires the freedom to challenge the status quo, to break rules, and to fail. But in Xi Jinping's China, disruption is seen as a threat to the party's control. We saw this clearly with the crackdown on the tech sector. When Jack Ma and Alibaba became too powerful, they didn't celebrate him as the Chinese Jeff Bezos. They disappeared him. They crushed the tutoring sector overnight. They regulated the gaming industry into oblivion. The message to every entrepreneur in China was clear. You can get rich, but don't get too powerful, and definitely don't try to change the system. As a result, China is stuck in the middle-income trap. They are now too expensive to be the world's sweatshop, losing jobs to Vietnam and India, but their technology is not advanced enough to replace the United States or Germany. And then came the sanctions. Since 2022, the US and its allies have systematically cut China off from the most advanced semiconductors. In 2026, despite pouring billions into domestic chip funds, China is still years behind. They can build the casing for the iPhone, but they cannot build the brain. So, the dragon has no teeth. The population is shrinking. The real estate market is dead. The borders are closed, and the innovation engine has stalled. But an economic collapse isn't actually the worst-case scenario. History teaches us that when a rising superpower realizes it has peaked, when it realizes that tomorrow will be worse than today, it becomes dangerous. It doesn't fade away quietly into the night. It lashes out. We are now entering the most volatile period in modern history because a dying dragon has only one card left to play to save its legitimacy, and playing that card could drag the entire world into war. So we return to the question that started this entire investigation. Will China replace the United States as the next global superpower? The answer, written in the demographic charts and the empty skylines of its ghost cities, is a resounding no. The Chinese century that everyone predicted in 2010 was a mirage. It was a projection based on a line on a graph that could only go up. But trees do not grow to the sky, and empires do not grow forever without young people to build them. We are witnessing the end of an era. The dragon isn't rising, it is peaking. And as history warns us, peak China is far more dangerous than rising China. When a superpower realizes its best days are behind it, when it realizes that tomorrow will be poorer, older, and weaker than today, it becomes desperate. It stops trying to win through economics and starts trying to win through force. This is the danger zone. This is why the geopolitical tension over Taiwan and the South China Sea has reached a boiling point in 2026. It is not a sign of China's strength. It is a symptom of its domestic failure, a distraction from the dying economy at home. China is following the path of Japan, but without the luxury of wealth. Japan became a comfortable, wealthy nursing home. China is becoming a volatile surveillance fortress. The Japan trap has snapped shut, and there is no escape. But this leaves us with a terrifying vacuum. If China is collapsing and it cannot lead the world, who will? Many assume that if China fails, the United States wins by default. They assume the 21st century will remain the American century simply because there is no challenger. They are wrong. While China is dying from a demographic heart attack, the United States is suffering from a monetary cancer. The eagle is sick with a different disease, one that is just as fatal. We are heading back to a unipolar world ruled by Washington. We are heading into the chaos of a leaderless world. China's collapse is visible, it's concrete, it's physical. But America's collapse is invisible. It's hidden in the debt cycles, the currency devaluation, and the internal division that is tearing the country apart from the inside. So, if the dragon is dying, how much time does the eagle have left? Is the United States about to follow the exact same path into oblivion? To understand the mathematical roadmap of America's end and why we are currently sitting at the most dangerous point in the cycle, you need to watch this video next, The 7 Stages of Empire Collapse. It explains exactly why Stage 6 is the beginning of the end and what comes next for your money when the cycle finally hits Stage 7. Click here to see the future. I'll see you there.